Eat it.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Lunch Table Podcast. In this episode, we will be reviewing Netflix's latest show and critically acclaimed show at that, Dahmer. Joining me today is my great friend Dylan. And so, Dylan, without further ado, let's get right into it. So, what do you feel about this show?
Well, hi guys, welcome to the
Hey,
show.
guys.
Yeah, it's weird. I heard the show by word of mouth, and I do like find like certain shows with serial killers like fascinating sometimes. Like I'm a huge fan of anyone's watched Mindhunter, which is also on Netflix. It's a really great show. I actually got this T-shirt. It's
Mm.
from it too. Um, yeah, Evan Peters, man, this is like a weird he said like this is like one of the hardest roles he's ever played, and I really like see like the dedication he took in this role. And it makes me wonder like how he reacted like after filming. It's like what he took like back with him. Like it's gonna be it's where it's like Heath Ledger with the Joker. It's like when you play these very controversial characters, especially ones based on real life, right? It's kinda like, what do you take away from that experience? And shout out to the amazing cast. I mean, Richard Jenkins as Mr. Dahmer, he fucking nailed it, dude. Like, I really felt like his turmoil in this whole show. But yeah, what were your thoughts on the series?
So yeah, first off, Evan Peters, he always like for the most part, he's like into like these very dark and like dangerous characters, and I do wonder if he's gonna take some stuff back with him. But I heard that the crew helped him; they were like the guide rails for him, so he doesn't like go over too far, and I'm glad. So they kept him safe. Everybody else was wonderful. Um, eh, what's funny is I keep saying this to a lot of people. There's a lot of talk of mass shootings. There's a lot of talk of this and that. And we're also reviewing Handmaid's Tale, and a lot of people are saying that the Second Amendment, this Second Amendment, that, or if you have too much freedom with one particular thing, it could become dangerous. While some aspects of that argument can be pretty correct, I think really this is a cautionary tale, just like the Joker was. Whereas if we don't help each other, right, from the beginning, if we're not there for each other, then something like this can always happen. It's just not going to stay there in the 1980s and the 1990s. For the most part, evil changes throughout time, and it carries many names, many faces. And I love how they did this, especially with Jeffrey Dahmer here. I consider Jeffrey Dahmer, at least in this show, to kind of be like a nuclear reaction, something like an event that went off, kind of like Chernobyl, right? You had the right elements that weren't where they were supposed to be, and then it created something like this. So through the show, we didn't feel really sorry for him, but we could understand how society let down a lot of people, and including Jeffrey Dahmer as well. It's not fantasizing, or like it's not uh, trying to streamline the events that happen. It's not trying to make it's really raw. It's hard to watch, but it's very honest, and I really appreciate that. And I think it also showed a lot of respect for the unfortunate victims of Jeffrey Dahmer. But yeah, this was a great series. Every episode's really long. I think the score was great. I think the acting was great, but I wanted to get your thoughts on some of the characters. So for the most part, we keep going back to Glenda, right? She was a neighbor that knew, but nobody listened to her. So, what were your thoughts of
Mhm.
that dynamic between her and Dahmer and the police?
Yeah, well, like you said, like so many elements just came together to make this tragedy happen. So it's like Glenda, she's like Red Riding Hood, right? She's like the boy who cried wolf, right? Like nobody. And at the time too, like I wonder if like because Glenda is obviously a black woman, so there isn't like a great relationship with the police at this time, and I think they kind of explored that as well. Like because Dahmer was a predominantly white male, like he probably got away with a lot of stuff, but he's also a gay male too, so it's like there's like a weird like play with that too. But yeah, so it's like there's so many signs that obviously could have been avoided. So many times, like, they even played, like, the clip of, like, the police phone call that she called and was like, "Did you identify this young boy? Is he, like, really, like, of age?" And they're kinda just like, "Yeah, we took care of it," right? So it's like, and they addressed that too, and like with the police captain, he was like, this could have been obviously avoided. And there's like so many signs that the father could have seen, right, with the taxidermy stuff, or the grandmother, right. I think I think for the family members, I think maybe they just had this kind of like idea of like their little boy could do no harm, right? But or maybe there's like a denial, like even Dahmer said, like I think like the grandmother just didn't want to really like dive deeper into like what was going on in his head. But I think that denial really contributed to so many. It's kind of like ignorance is bliss, right? It's like, yeah, Dahmer committed a lot of these acts, but it's like the ignorance of so many other people kind of like helped him along his journey, right? Um, but yeah, the performances were great. I mean, this show reminded me because I used to watch uh, American Crime Story, the second season with Darren Criss,
Right.
and it reminded me so much of that. Just like these kind of like charismatic, you know, people that had, like, relationship issues with their family, obviously, and I think now I think now we're talking a little bit more, like you said, about, like, mental health, and I think it's getting better, and that's probably why we don't see as many cases like these, because in that time, it was a very sensitive topic, like, people didn't really, like, discuss, like, homosexuality, or, like, those kind of, like, innate thoughts, um, but, I mean, you could still see the signs, right? But I want to know, like, what was your, like, thoughts on, like, there's kinda, like, this weird, like, fetishization, I would say, of, like, serial killers, and especially I've noticed in, like, recent years, there's been a lot of, like, serial killer movies with, like, these young, like, good-looking actors, and it's kinda like a weird fetishization, but what are your thoughts on it? Do you think it's putting serial killers in, like, a negative light or a more positive light? How would you react to it?
Yeah, so for the most part, I think it's I think that if you are putting them if you're doing a spotlight, right? It's kind of like a spotlight story. It's kind of like disrespectful to um get this really handsome I mean, Evan Peters not an ugly guy, but what I'm trying to say is it has to be authentic because people actually died. And if you the Joker worked really well, right? I think because and it makes it dangerous as well because you're getting into the mentality where you see society fails you, and I think that's what's important here. Jeffrey Dahmer apparently he thought that there wasn't anything wrong with his brain, and there wasn't like an in-depth research to see his brain, right? So for the most part it kind of seems like this is his upbringing, like so many elements went bad for him to create this monster. Now if you make if you cast like I don't know, like a Brad Pitt to play Jeffrey Dahmer or something, and you kind of make this like a really streamlined, like cool ass score type of movie, Thelma and Louise type of movie or something like that, it comes off bad and it's very disingenuous to the victims, right? Um, I think every serial killer movie or show that comes out has to be a cautionary tale because always something, especially in the 70s where people weren't really understanding, or the 80s or the 90s. I think for now, I would like to see stuff or movies that take place currently. I think, like I said earlier, evil has a new face, and I really consider like any gang member or any type of criminal, right? For the most part, there's a brotherhood. They have each other. It makes it more dangerous. They could keep on killing. There's no ending. For the most part, a lot of serial killers, they want to show off their work and eventually they want to be caught, right? They feel good about the publicity. And which is funny, it's kind of like a meta thing. It's like Jeffrey Dahmer's like, wow, I got all these fan letters, right, in jail. And he kind of feels a little bit better about himself, right? So imagine now in these days of
Mhm.
social media, where everyone is so separated, a little mention here and there can make you feel a little bit better, and I think that's dangerous as well. And I think we are treading on a thin line as a society, and if something collapses, I promise you, I promise you, I promise you, most of the people will become like animals because they have that hate, they have that revenge that they want to enact. That's why I think this show is really important to see. I think Joker is too, and I think other shows probably did an injustice to what's happening or what happened before because we're fantasizing about well, shit, yeah, this is kinda cool. There's like a cool ass fucking groovy, soundtrack with some movies that have serial
There's a
killers.
weird yeah, there's like a weird, like I don't know how to explain it. It's like it's weird when you present this kind of context in a very like when you think of Netflix, you think of like, oh, hit show. So obviously it's gonna be like this cool show. They use like cool music, right? Or they present it in like a cool style. So it's like it's not supposed to be viewed in that way per se. It's like, yeah, it brings a clear definition to what the story was, right? I think America too, especially, has like a weird kind of like infatuation with like serial killers and like horror in general or like traumatic experiences. I think,
I
especially this time period, like to oh, what were you gonna say?
no, 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 keep going.
Yeah, because I was gonna say like you were talking about like how Dahmer kind of became like this celebrity almost, and it's like at that time when you think about it, there's like a lot of um a lot of breaking out of these shells of like culture, right? It's like so many people were kind of like, you know, forced, you know, things down their throat of like, oh, well, you have to be a good person, right? Especially back now, it's a little more loose, and we have, you know, things are more culturally acceptable. But I think back then it was kind of like everybody had to be like a good, upstanding citizen, right? So now there were when that you have this big traumatic story that comes out. Now there's just like this public kind of like interest in like the macabre, right?
And I also think, I personally believe I have a great respect for a lot of people, and other people that maybe disrespect me. Obviously, I have a disrespect for them, but I personally believe that everyone has a potential to either become a savior or become a destroyer. And I think this infatuation with serial killer movies or any type of horror movie, I think we love it so much because it's a self-reflection. In the case of Jeffrey Dahmer watching The Exorcist, demons are so compelling because they have tendencies for like the person actually reading about them to self-reflect on something. They kind of, we all have this fantasy about enacting something, and for the most part, I think the dangerous
Mhm.
thing to think about is a lot of people, if they watch an action movie, they think that they could fucking beat everybody up like Jason Statham if they were in that situation. um, I think it's a self-reflection of our society. That's why zombie movies are so awesome to a lot of people. There's such a fandom behind it because
Mhm.
we're the villains, right? We're the ones coming after each other. And that's why I keep saying we're on a thin line. And with this, he was a nuclear meltdown waiting to happen.
And Dahmer even said like he like when he was younger he like dressed up as like the devil, and he liked it, right? So it's kind of like a weird like you immerse yourself into the character a little bit too much, but it's like I really think he was insane, but I don't know. There's weird moments where like he kind of like he's self-aware and like he knows what he's doing, so it's kind of like hard to he like treads this weird line. So I mean, I don't know like how accurate this show was to like the real story, but it kind of made it seem like he was they were kind of like humanizing him in a weird way because it's weird because like you have to remind yourself that he's a monster obviously, and this really took place and he killed like 17 people.
Mm.
But it's weird because like I don't know. Do you think this show made Dahmer or tried to make Dahmer a more relatable person?
I think, I give them credit for showing a lot of other characters like perspective on things, and I think for the most part, sometimes I felt like I was a passenger looking at this like guy who's like really weird. Sometimes that's the dangerous thing. I like when shows question my morality or like just question me in general, or like, I feel kind of scared that I have some similarities to certain characters. And I think perhaps that was like a way of creating this perversion, like for the viewer at least, for you to feel like, well, shit, yeah, I actually feel really lonely and I fantasize about being this girl
Mhm.
with a girl sometimes, just laying next to somebody or something like that, right? And then you see him and he's like actually going all out just to get a mannequin and sleep next to the mannequin. Um, you know, probably because I think for the most part we all need help of some kind. and we all need to talk to a professional, or we all just need to talk to a family member. And I felt bad, really felt bad for the grandma. And she was trying to do good by taking away the mannequin. I just wish she talked to him a little bit, you know? I like when we
Mhm.
put ourselves in other people's shoes and think, uh, how would we go about this situation? Probably they were humanizing him a little bit. Um, because otherwise it'll kinda be like a documentary. It's gonna be like that History Channel type of documentary where, like, you have that actor that doesn't really speak and you don't care about them and you're just watching them. So you have
Mhm.
to kind of, like, do that to progress, through the whole story. But for the most part, I think they did it okay. I think they were treading on a thin line, and I think everyone knew that, especially, Evan Peters. I think that's why it worked. And also, we have to feel uncomfortable watching this, and I don't think they held back, and that was good, right? We had to feel like, "Oh, I don't wanna keep looking at this," right? But they
Mhm.
they did it in such a way where you could keep on watching this, and you wouldn't feel like, "Well, shit, I don't wanna look at Evan Peters as Jeffrey Dahmer anymore." No, you just wanna keep going, right, to see this fully fulfilled, and I don't know, I think this is a really delicate project, to create, So, props to
It's
Ryan Murphy.
yeah, it's strange context because it's like you watch this show, but then you watch, like, a fucking, like, the Silence of the Lambs movie, right? And you're so invested in that
Right.
movie. But then, like, the only difference between that and this is that this actually happened, right? So it's like it keeps drawing you in for some reason. And I think that's why Glenda was actually like I it's great that they included her because it's like she's kind of like our eyes, right? She's kind of like that reminder that hey, this may be a series and you're watching it for entertainment, but at the end of the day, these were real people and this actually happened and so many lives were affected, right? So she's kind of like that check, that reality check, right? Um Yeah, how did you feel about, the dad in this series? Because he's very, like, prominent in Dahmer's story, and Richard Jenkins, I think, did a phenomenal job, portraying him. You know, I mean, it's sad that I'm laughing, but I keep thinking of Step Brother.
Right.
It's like, "Jeff, no power tool."
Right.
But, yeah, what did you think of Richard Jenkins' performance in this show?
He's great, man. He's everywhere, but, like, you don't really notice him, and I think that's one of the great things about Richard Jenkins is, like, he doesn't, like, outshine. He plays his part really well, right? Where he kinda feels like he's a part of the set, and I think that's awesome. I that whole character, I was, like, so frustrated with him a lot of times, but I was more annoyed with the mother, Joyce, rather
Yeah,
than
I was
him.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, because he tried sometimes in his own way to do something good, right? But, that time, and I'm sure people have, like, parents like him, and it's just like sometimes you just don't have that person that listens, but they care somehow, right? They just don't show it that well. So I think he played it awesome. What about you? What do you think of him?
Yeah, I think he had good intentions for his son. I mean, obviously, he wanted him to succeed in life, and he tried his best, to be there. And I definitely agree. I think he was more there for Jeff than the mother was. Um, but I think at times, like, I think he just was too ignorant of what was going on, and he could have been there more. Um, and I was really sad toward the end too, because like he was really trying to help Jeff. Like the closest they ever bonded was when Jeff got to prison, unfortunately. But he did try to help him, like, he tried to get vouch for the judge to get him, like, mental health. Um, so it's a really sad tale, and then it's a cautionary tale, for, parents as well. It's like, try to be more involved in your kid's life, right? I mean, obviously not don't be overbearing, but I think sometimes you have to, really check up on your kids and see, what's happening behind the scenes, but yeah, even with the grandmother too, like, she was a sweet lady, I'm not gonna lie, I was really mad. Um, but yeah, but even with her, like, she thought the answer to everything was church, right? But obviously it wasn't just that because, stuff was going on and right under her house, right? And she didn't even care to check on that. Um, but I think what really made this series, I think, watchable for me was we got to see like the perspective of the victims too, right? Not just, the monster obviously. Um we saw, like, you know, the deaf person, that he killed, like, his really from his, like, his birth, we saw, like, his story, um, and so many other unfortunate act victims, with the Asian family too. So what were your opinions on, like, seeing, like, their side of the story?
I think that was really important because if you didn't do that, I think the show will go bad. I think it'll go sour real quick, which is funny because considering what happened here. But then you won't feel anything for the victims. When we watch Expendables, you don't really feel bad for like people, right? Because they're soldiers, but they have families, right? And so obviously these victims, some people did things for money, like the Asian kid. He said, "I'm doing this for my family." It obviously, clearly, you probably gonna get hurt, right? But he did it for his family, and so the death guy, I think that struck people really like it was heavy because they showed the birth, right? And then they showed the death. So it's his whole life basically in that one episode. Very sad stuff. And I think it also shows you how far Dahmer's willing to go, like knowing somebody, and you have to do something like that. Um, I it's heavy. It's just really heavy. It really is. Obviously, two people escaped from Dahmer, and I'm glad they kind of showed like the side of like, oh, look how society and how we mistreat black people here and there, or any colored person, at least the police,
Mhm.
right? What do you think about him?
Well, they brought up a good point in the show when he was being interrogated by the detectives, and they asked him, like, did you purposely, like, prey on, like, black people?
Mm.
And he said, well, that's just what was available to me. Um, it's a weird double standard in my opinion. It's like, I think in a way, like, he's telling a half truth, like, maybe because he was struggling, um, maybe that's just, like, the kind of neighborhood he could, live in, and then because many communities of color are, unfortunately forced to live in certain areas, like, that's what he was used to, but in a weird way, he kinda, like, fetishized, black men in a way. Um, but yeah, what were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's interesting because it kind of seemed like this coincidental happening where he's just there, and then and if he is in love with black people, he loves black people in his own way, in his own Dahmer way. Well, there's just abundance of in that neighborhood. So like I could see it kind of like a coincidental thing, but I could also see I feel like the show really tried to set up this notion of like how society fails people. And I don't think it's just on Dahmer's part. I think it's also like the black community in general in that neighborhood. And like a lot of like Glenda's like dialogue made note of that here and there, especially when she was trying to take after like this new neighbor, right? And tell there's some shady characters here and stuff.
Mhm.
So for the most part, yeah, I don't know what's the true story. I know in this show, at least, it kinda made it seem like this was a coincidence, uh, but at the same time, too, I think it could be up for interpretation, and I think that's okay because I don't know if that's, like, a
Mhm.
factual thing that Dahmer actually did that. So I think taking that for interpretation is, like, the right way to go about it, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, very true. So, I mean, overall, I mean, what would you rate this show, and what were your, you know, overall thoughts on the series? And do you think we'll see more stories like this
Mm.
kind of like down the line?
I think Ryan Murphy I hope he I loved American Crime Stories. I didn't watch the latest one with, Bill Clinton. I watched a little bit of it, but then, this whole thing, Monster, I hope this is a great entryway to, like, cover other serial killers and make commentary on not just them, but society. I think that's really important, um, because we can't live alone, right? We just can't function, right? So we need to help each other, and sometimes we actually do more damage than good. So yeah, I think for sure we'll see a lot more stories like this, and as long as they make these stories as genuine as possible as this one was, for sure. Out of 1 to 10, I give this a 0 because it's a horrible tale to actually, like, love this show, but the way how they did everything, I'll give it a 10 out of 10. How about you?
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's I have a weird conflict of interest because it's like, yeah, like you said, it's not supposed to really like be like a story that you're like, oh, awesome, right? It's a tragedy, and it's an informal tragedy. And I think down the line we could see a lot of other shows like these, like American Crime Story, obviously, because they even mention like certain serial killers like Ed Gein, like he was the inspiration for Leatherface. But I think as controversial as these types of like shows and movies are, I think they're kind of important. It's like we have to relate history because, like you said, it's a cautionary tale, and we need to understand how these things happen, right? It's like if you like erase like footage of like the Nazis, right? It's like, yeah, obviously that's a negative connotation, but otherwise you're just removing history and you're not really learning anything, right? So I think if they do it in a way kind of like this, like where they show all sides of the story, and try to be respectful, of course, towards the victims, I think it could be like a successful, you know, documentation, right? So I would give this, honestly, I would give this an 8 or 9 out of 10. I think it was really well told. I think Evan Peters, obviously, I don't want to say killed it, but he nailed it as Dahmer. I think his mannerisms were really like spot on. I think he really like did research for this part and really like knew what he was getting into with this story. The music just like it was so eerie, like watching it, you just like you said, felt uncomfortable in every scene. Like you thought like maybe you were gonna be like the victim, like sitting in this room with Dahmer, right? Um, but yeah, I thought it was a great series overall.
Cool. Yeah, well, guys, that's our review for Dahmer. If you made it to the end, please check out our other reviews. We just reviewed Rami, really great show. Every week we're reviewing Still, we're reviewing Andor, Handmaid's Tale, and we have plenty of content, as I always say, coming in October and November and December. And if Jeff, the god of gaming, reveals like some more stuff for
Not
Game
Jeff
Awards.
Dahmer.
Oh, sorry, yeah,
Jeff Keighley.
Jeff Keighley. Yeah. Jeff Keighley reveals some more stuff about gaming, right? Well, we're gonna cover it for sure. And keep in mind, maybe this month we'll get a PlayStation showcase. So really stressful for us, but cool for everyone else. But yeah, so Dylan, without further ado, please take us away.
Yeah, thanks guys so much for tuning in for this review for Dahmer. Make sure you're following us on whatever platform you're listening to: YouTube, Anchor, Spotify, and Apple Music. We're expanding as a podcast every day. You can follow our socials on Instagram at The Lunch Table. You can also follow our TikTok page where we post clips of our podcast episodes as well. Yeah, we have a lot of great content coming up for you guys. A lot of content for Halloween. So we're going to be doing a Hellraiser review. Halloween Ends, of course, comes out very soon. And The Barbarian as well. So a lot of spooky content for you guys. But thank you so much. And until then, thanks for having lunch with us.
See you guys.